and welcome to another one in our series of Financial Wellbeing podcasts. But instead of myself and Chris Budd and Tom Morris wittering away about, what we've been doing, the golf we've been playing, the records we've been buying, we're taking a slightly different form this week. Tom isn't with us, but we do have Chris Budd. And actually, I'm going to interview Chris because Chris has got something to tell us. And I'm going to see if I can dig down a little bit deeper into what it is that he wants to tell us about. So before we get into the interview, Chris, what's this thing you want to tell us about?
Well, David, I have a terrible secret that I need to announce to the nation. I nap.
Excellent. And the next half hour will be Chris Budd napping.
I think it's the last social taboo. You're not allowed to admit that you nap during the day, but I've done it ever since I was a teenager, and it's great. But
interesting. We on the continent, it's a siesta. It's rather cool. It's rather sexy. I'm going to have a siesta. Over here, it's a power nap.
That's right.
Makes me better and fitter and stronger.
Anyway, sorry. There's the way you introduced that made me sound like I had a guilty secret to announce. So what we're talking about today, David, is something called the Financial Wellbeing Pulse. It is a way to measure our relationship with money.
Excellent. Well, that sounds absolutely fascinating. But before we get on to that, I think our regular listeners who've been listening to over 100 episodes of this podcast now would like to know a little bit more about the man that made all this happen, about you, Chris, about what makes you tick, about what your road was to becoming a financial advisor, before we get onto the details of the Pulse. So just tell us a little bit about young Chris Budd. Tell us about Chris. What were you like at school? What were your favourite subjects at school?
Whenever I read a music biography, and I read a lot of music biographies, I always love the ones that start at adult life. They don't start with, when I was 6, I had my formative, oh God, that's so tedious. So look, my father was a financial advisor, and I guess a lot of what I do was informed by one event in my 20s, actually, where my father went bankrupt. He was a financial advisor, kind of not by choice. He got made redundant from a life insurance company, joined somebody else in their business. They then retired. He then ended up on his own, and he ended up going bankrupt, and he lost his house. He lost everything. And he lost his pride as well. And I was closely involved with it, helping mortgage be paid for a while until it was just irretrievable. And I saw what it did to him. And there's a phrase that I use, which is, I decided I wasn't going to be a victim of life like my father was. And I guess seeing how when he earned quite well for a few years, and he was a bit of a show off, if I'm honest. He came from a very working class background. My grandfather was a road sweeper. And when Dad got a bit of money, he bought a few things to show that he had a bit of money. So when it was taken away, it really affected him because his self-worth had been built up as his net worth built up. And he needed external things for his pride. So all of this kind of goes into a melting pot that when I then set up Ovation Finance, my financial planning firm, which started in 1998, I decided I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be somebody who was just helping rich people get richer. I wanted to think a bit more about what it was all for. And I'm not going to say I did that from the outset, but over the years, I kind of developed my thinking until eventually back in 2015, and I wrote the Financial Wellbeing book. That's kind of the germ of what I saw my father go through ended up in this kind of thinking about the relationship between money and happiness.
That's interesting. And I think our parents' generation, they're roughly of the similar generation. I think that post-war or during the war and post-war generation, I think a lot of them had that in common, coming from sometimes quite not very well off backgrounds, going through that period of relative prosperity through the 1950s and 60s when all of a sudden people had more opportunities in life and could start to create wealth. But for a lot of people, they didn't necessarily know what to do with it when they had it. And it was, as you say, it was about, look at me, look what I've got this shiny new thing. But that hasn't necessarily, and clearly in your dad's case, for circumstances presumably largely beyond his control, didn't necessarily bring them the happiness that they hoped that it would have done.
No, exactly. And you can also add to that, I was a teenager. I was born in 1967. So I was a teenager and then we might say young adult, in the 80s, during Thatcherism, during the greed is good, Gordon Gekko kind of yuppies and all that kind of stuff that came along with it, loads of money and all that. And I found the whole thing terribly vulgar. It just didn't work for me at all. I remember working with a guy who was a real yuppie when I worked for Sun Life, one of my very first jobs in Bristol it was. And he just was a flash the cash, and he was just not a very nice person, if I'm honest. So the whole association that more money makes you more happy, makes you a better person, it's just never worked for me. I don't judge people. If somebody wants to be rich, that's cool. That's why that works for them. So there's no judging in all of this. It just didn't work for me.
So 1998, you set up Ovation Finance, your own financial advisory company. Was that just you on your own initially?
Yeah, it was. It was in many ways a great mistake. I only did it because I couldn't find. I wanted to charge time, and back in the 90s, you charged commission. So you set up an investment bond for 5.3%. You could have done a unit trust for 3%, but that paid you less commission, so you did the bond instead. This is the world I was working in, and I didn't like that world. I didn't like the fact that if I went to a party and somebody said, "What do you do for a living?" and I said, "I'm a financial advisor," they rolled their eyes and kind of went to talk to somebody else. So I thought there has to be a different way of doing this, and so I started charging time and retainer fees, and I was literally laughed at. Literally, there was a guy I worked with, and he laughed in my face when I sent out my first invoice. He said, "You actually think people are going to pay this?" And yes, I do. I earned a lot less than I could have earned from the commission route, but I had started to build up loyal clients who I saw every year. This is the norm now. But back in 1998, I was just on my own. I mean, I actually wasn't. I didn't know this, but there were a few others doing similar things in the country. But as far as I was aware, I was on my own. So, but slowly but surely, after a few very, very difficult early years, started to build things up, and ended up with a bunch of lovely clients and lovely employees. And back in 2018, sold it to something called an employee ownership trust, and now it continues under the employees' governance. And I'd like to think it's a very happy place to work.
Excellent. So I think it's probably fair to say then you've always been a bit of an innovative thinker and always not been somebody that's been happy to go down the same road that everybody else has been going down. You've always gone, well, hang on a minute, that might be how they do that, but I don't want to do it that way. Is there a different way of doing it?
That is very true. There are certain words that I think only other people should give you. I can think of a few, but maybe we won't go down that road. But mentor, for example, I shouldn't call myself somebody's mentor. It's up to them to decide that I'm their mentor. Do you know what I mean? And I think there are other words, entrepreneur, and I'm going to get grandiose, visionary, pioneer. Those are all words that I don't think one should use. I didn't set out to change the world. I just thought there's a better way of doing this. With financial well-being, I just thought, money, happiness, those two, I wonder how they work together. So I started researching it.
Which leads us very nicely into what my next question was going to be. So you've got your company, you've got through the difficult time of setting it up, you're established, you're doing pretty well, you're starting to employ other people. That's around about the time that I met you and became one of your clients, that I continue to be with Ovation to this very day. And tell us where the whole notion of financial well-being came from, and indeed what it is. What is it?
It's a really, really important question, David. Financial well-being is an area of study which looks at the relationship between money and happiness. A line I use when I do talks is that I actually invented the phrase financial well-being. I just didn't know that two other people invented it before me. Now, that is actually true, because when I came up with the title for the book that I was writing, I Googled it, and there were only 2 entries on that Google search. Now, where did it come from? It came from a place called the Penny Bron UK Cancer Centre. My wife is an oncology nurse, you know Susie well, and she did some work at the Penny Bron Centre, and what they do is they help you to live well with cancer, is the expression that they use. And I learned about the relationship between stress and being poorly. Let's move away from just cancer, but general health. So we have in our bodies immune cells. And immune cells keep us healthy. They battle the bad cells like the cancerous cells. So conventional medicine, if you get cancer, will zap the cancerous cells. But what about looking after and supporting the immune cells? We should be doing some of that too. So that's the principle of what they do at Penny Bron. And when Susie was telling me this, I thought to myself, and I said, well, hang on, one of the biggest causes of stress is worries about money. I know, I'm going to write a book called How Financial Planning Can Prevent Cancer. And she kind of looked at me and went, I'm not sure that's a good idea. So I thought about a better title and came up with the title of Financial Wellbeing. But it was really all about trying to reduce stress and worries about money by having a better relationship with money. And that was a starting point of all of this.
And I have to say, and some people, some listeners might say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? But when I read that book, it really did fundamentally change the way in which I looked at money as well, because it sets out in a very clear way what financial well-being is, and how, rather than just having money for the sake of having money, you can actually start to think about how you can use it to make your life better, to make you feel better, and perhaps make other people feel better in the process as well. So for me, it was a very important book, and obviously we've gone on to do over 100 podcasts about it, and we'll continue to do more, I hope. And indeed, you've written a follow-up to it as well. So you wrote the first book in 2015, and what's happened to financial well-being since then?
Well, it's kind of taken off. I mentioned they were kind of taken off. There were 2 entries on that Google search, that I said earlier on. If you Google it now, there's something like 320 million. Now, I can't claim all of those, right? Well, I can. I probably will at times. But the reality is that it also has become a big deal in the workplace. Now, I got a little bee in my bonnet about this one. In the workplace, when you hear the phrase financial well-being, it tends to describe somebody who is teaching about financial education, about debt and how to manage your money and budgeting. Financial well-being for me is way broader than that. The second book was called The 4 Cornerstones of Financial Wellbeing, and it encompasses those 4 cornerstones are what's true of all of us. And that can be from theology, from psychology, from neuroscience, behavioral finance. There's lots of areas of research about happiness and what's true of us all. The second cornerstone is what's true of each of us. So that's understanding how this applies to you in your life. The third cornerstone is the barriers that are true of all of us. And then the fourth cornerstone are the barriers that's true of each of us. So there's so much in that that's a really broad topic that's way more than simply looking at how to manage your money a bit better. And in fact, some of that theory and research, if we apply it, can solve the budgeting problem by itself through education of how we behave and how we see money can sometimes actually work against our own best interests. So it's about making better financial decisions, and it's grown and grown and grown. I've founded the Institute of Financial Wellbeing, so financial advisors can learn more about this. We've got the podcast. There's the Financial Wellbeing Certificate that people can take, that actually advisors can take to learn more about it. So I kind of see it as a direction of travel for financial advice in the UK over the next decade.
Excellent. Okay, so we have a better understanding now, or a broad understanding of what financial well-being is. Tell us about the Pulse and how that will help to aid our understanding or the way in which we can apply financial well-being in our lives.
So there's a great expression, which is that you are what you measure, or you concentrate or focus on what you measure. And there's an organization called the Centre for Thriving Places. It used to be called Happy City. Members of the IFW who listen to this will know Liz Zeidler, who has spoken at conferences I put on. And they've been measuring happiness for quite a long time. So they have something called the Happiness Pulse. And you can go and find out how happy you are, which is great. But this is used a lot, for example, by employers, because if you want to put interventions into your workplace to help people, you need to know what to focus on. So, but more importantly, you need to see the impact of your interventions. So you then go and do the Happiness Pulse a year later, and you can see the effect of what you've been doing. So the Financial Wellbeing Pulse is a development of that Happiness Pulse by adding on a financial well-being set of questions. The way it works is a financial advisor has got a client coming to see them. They send them a link. The client goes through the pulse and they get a score. your financial well-being is 40%. They also get a short report which explains what that means. The advisor gets a copy of that report so the client can discuss it with the advisor in the meeting. A year later, or whatever period it might be, the client goes back for their annual planning meeting or annual review meeting. They do it again and they get a new score. Your financial well-being is 50%. So now the advisor can say that your financial well-being is increased by 10 basis points as a result of our relationship.
And are they the same questions that you ask each year?
Yes.
Yeah, and how did you come up with them?
That is the real strength of the Pulse. There's a chap who works with Centre for Thriving Places called Professor Sam Wren-Lewis, who's a professor of psychology and has written amazing books on happiness. There's also a chap called Dr. Thomas Mathar, who works as in the Heads Behavioural Unit of Aegon, and myself. And the three of us got together over quite a period of time and worked at all of the theories and research on happiness and came up with this question set. So the academic rigor behind the questions is a real important strength. Also, what's an important strength of it is that the questions are very intuitive. So the whole Pulse takes about 10 minutes to complete. It could be, I've done it in 5, but you can do it in 10 if you take a bit of thought over it. So it's not onerous and it's very intuitive. And that's one of the real strengths of it. One of my favorite quotes about writing is Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher, who said, "I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a shorter one." And so it's taken us a lot of time to get to this question set, which is very intuitive, very simple. The other part to it, sorry, just one other little bit, David, if I may. The other bit is what the firm gets, because the firm gets a dashboard of all of the data from all of the client questionnaires. So they can see across all of their advisors, all of their clients, how things are going. They can give a total firm score, so you can put on your website. We increased the financial well-being of our clients on average by 12%, which is a hell of a thing to say in your marketing.
So clearly that's a very important aspect for both client and for the firm as well. In what other ways do you think financial well-being or measuring financial well-being in this way is important?
Well, it's going to be massively important for one very, very key requirement of firms now under what's called consumer duty. It's a new compliance regime that firms have to go under. And one of the requirements of consumer duty is you need to demonstrate the impact of your advice. And this has got a lot of firms scratching their heads. How can we demonstrate that we're doing a good job? Well, now you get a number. The Financial Wellbeing Pulse will give you an average across all your clients, and you can give that to the FCA and show how the impact of your advice on your clients. It's a very simple, easy tick for the consumer duty requirement. And that is going to be, I think, the biggest reason it will get taken up by firms. Actually, it will also skew the discussions away from money and etc. into well-being, which can't be a bad thing, I don't think, as well. But the consumer duty tick is going to be a big driver, I think.
Yeah, I can see that. So you're essentially you're providing a benchmark figure for something that it's not been possible to benchmark before, and you're giving people a way of comparing performance as well, because I guess that is important within your industry.
Totally, yeah, but the performance that's usually measured is investment performance rather than the performance of the advisors with the client, because it hasn't been a way of measuring that, exactly as you say. Yes.
Excellent. And so, I mean, you've touched on some of that, but fundamentally, what's the problem you think that is being solved by this?
When clients go to see financial advisors, generally speaking, what they're asking for, the question that they ask is not actually what they're asking, what they need. Let me give you an example. Say somebody who's 53 goes to see a financial advisor and says, "I'd like a pension review. I've got 10 different pots. Can you do a pension review, please?" And the financial advisor will say, "Great, that's my area of expertise. Scoop them all together, put them into self-invested pension, create an investment portfolio. Good job." Not criticizing that in the slightest. What the client actually wanted, however, is that they're doing a job which they don't enjoy. They're quite depressed. They've got a boss that bullies them. They can't see any way that they can retire before 65 because they don't really understand how pensions work. And they would love somebody to just give them a way out to maybe doing a different job that they could get paid less for, but that gives them more purpose in life. The financial advisor's never asked any of that. They've never got into any of those things. They've just done the pension review and created an investment portfolio within a SIP. So this is a way of uncovering true client objectives. If you look at the suitability letter that all clients have to get every time there's a product recommendation, that suitability letter has got to start off with what are your objectives. And they almost always say something like, your objective is to access our investment proposition, or your objective is to beat inflation with your investment. And they're all the same. And they're not actually objectives at all. They're actually outcomes. So this is a way of helping a client to really understand, therefore the advisor, to really understand what their objectives actually are. Because if you go to see a financial advisor, you think you're going to talk about money. And so there's a big barrier in the way of this conversation. This is a way of opening up the conversation and getting much deeper into client objectives.
Wow, fascinating. And I mean, this sounds like something, certainly I've never heard of anything like this before. Is there anything else out there like the Pulse? Any other similar tools? You've talked about the happiness Pulse, but I mean, is there anything else that's measuring financial well-being in the way that you're proposing to do it?
Not that I know of. There's a number of other tools which will measure your financial, say, capability. They will look at how good you are at budgeting, and like I said before, and maybe if you've got appropriate life assurance, that kind of stuff, and they're very useful. But this is different. This is not doing that. This is a different kind of tool because it's about your relationship to money. There are 3 different sets of questions within the financial wellbeing tool. One of the sets looks at how good you are with money, so your financial capability, but not asking you what life assurance you have, but just whether you feel in control of your finances, for example. The second set looks at your values. Do you see money as an objective, which we know from research will make you less happy, and other similar sorts of financial values. And the third one looks at your financial situation, whether you feel, for example, that you are able to help people that you want to help. And so it looks at areas that normal financial planning tools don't look at. So it will work with any of those as an adjunct. It's a different thing.
And is this something that an ordinary member of the public could access, or is it exclusively for financial advisors?
At the moment, it's just been launched, and it is exclusively through the financial advice community. So anybody who wants this, ideally go and say to your financial advisor, please, could you sign up to the Financial Wellbeing Pulse so I can access it? In time, we've got a lot of workplace providers who are very, very interested in it. So there's a few people who do wellbeing in the workplace, or they service workplace pensions, that kind of stuff. They're very, very interested. So that will be coming, I don't know when, but that will be the next iteration. And then general public, maybe in time, but the idea is to help financial advisors help their clients better. That's really the objective at the outset, at least.
So if you're a financial advisor sitting at home listening to this going, this sounds a fantastic idea, what do you do next? Where do you go? How do you source it? And more importantly, what's it going to cost?
So you go to a website, which will be in the show notes, but it's financialwellbeingpulse.com. It costs, depending on the type of firm, its starting price is really, really low. It's £25 a month for a bunch of licenses, enough for you to be, a bunch of uses, enough to be able to use in a year, probably about 70 uses. And then, but it's deliberately priced as low as we can get it because I want impact. I'm not financially driven. I want impact. I want this affecting pushing the direction of travel of the financial advice community. Anybody who's in a larger firm or a multi-advisor firm, there's obviously discounts then for multiple licenses. And anybody who's in a really big firm, give me a call. But if they go to that website, all the information you have is on there. The sign-up ability is on there. You can get using it within hopefully about 10 minutes.
Well, as a client of Ovation Finance, who I'm sure have signed up for it, I look forward very much to sitting down with Tom Morris, who's my financial advisor, and him going through this Financial Wellbeing Pulse with me. It genuinely sounds absolutely fascinating, Chris, and I think you might just have hit on something here.
Bless you, David. Thank you. I can't stress enough, it is as simple to use as possible. And I would also say for those people who just want the consumer duty tick, and who don't actually want to sit in front of their clients and discuss this, you can still use it. The client will get the report, and and they can find that interesting, and you'll get all the data to tell the FCA. But anybody who does want to have that conversation with their clients, they'll get a copy of the report and they can discuss it. So it's as simple or as complicated as you want it to be.
Excellent. Chris, that's been a really interesting chat. Thanks for sharing that with us. I hope you at home have found that, well, you might not be at home, you might be at work, but wherever you are, I hope you found that interesting. And I hope you'll join us again at some indeterminate point in the future for another one in our series of financial wellbeing podcasts.
If you want to be notified of upcoming podcasts, make sure you click the subscribe button. For more information on the topics discussed in today's podcast and to purchase a copy of the Financial Wellbeing book, please visit www.financialwell-being.co.uk. We'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas on financial well-being. You can send us an email at contact@financialwell-being.co.uk. You can follow us on Twitter @FinWellbeing. Chris is Ovation Chris, and David is @Dave_Backwell. This has been an Ovation Finance production. Thanks for listening to the Financial Wellbeing Podcast. More interesting than you might think.